And we also have a group here on campus called the basically Greater Lafayette Security Professionals, which is basically our information security professionals in the local area that we meet about once a month, and we talk about various topics. And if you're interested in participating in that, it's certainly open to students as well. Please let me know after the presentation here. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are related to some of the challenges we see in information security, specifically in the university environment. I have a variety of experience in the corporate world, and the challenges in the university are very interesting. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And usually the top three that bubble up to the top anytime you talk about information security is people, process, and technology. And so we'll focus a little bit on that today. And then I'll talk a little bit about how budgets in the university environment can in fact impact what we do. And then regulations and compliance. And then we'll talk a little bit about the unique assets of the university and unique threats that we have. So we'll start off, as I mentioned, with kind of this overview that you're probably very familiar with and have come across before in these types of discussions. And first up, we'll talk about the people involved. And what's interesting here is that the changing landscape that we have in information security has really required us to get a lot more people involved with the security process. And so some of the skills that are needed to address these issues really require technical knowledge, but also leadership qualities. Oops. And I mention that because, excuse me, we have to be able to set a direction and address security challenges, and finding the right leadership and people management necessary to do that is very essential. It's often you'll find in the university environments a lot of technical people and a lack of leadership. And the issues with that is you might be working on projects that may not be relevant to the strategy that you're trying to address, or just trying to run the day-to-day operations without the right management in place. And so while we might, as technical employees, we might like to joke about how managers make silly mistakes and do silly things and may not understand the technical environment. Having the right people in place to provide that technical leadership is essential as well. And we're going to be working on a variety of projects, so obviously having good project management skills is essential, but also time management, because you're going to get a lot of projects thrown your way. I think I've lost count at currently the number of projects I have in my box right now, so it is significant. But also a last skill that's always important, and you may hear this anytime you talk about careers in the modern workforce, is communication skills. And that is being able to convey very complex and complicated ideas to people who do not have a similar understanding. And so communication becomes very essential, whether that be presentations like this, email, written communication, those sorts of things. Certifications we typically talk about as being kind of essential for the job market, and they're becoming more important. You may find a lot of job postings nowadays list as a requirement a specific certification. A lot of them may be professional type certifications like the CISSP. They might be more technical oriented certifications that deal specifically with products. So an example of that might be the Cisco certifications, the Microsoft certifications as well. Anyways, finding skilled security professionals is becoming a little more difficult. We have several open positions right now and a long list of resumes to look at. But even looking through resumes is not always a good indicator of what somebody's effective information security skill is. And some of that is helped by some certifications, but still it doesn't address necessarily how well the person does at project management or time management or communications, and those sorts of things are very important. As there are higher demand for security professionals, there's also a smaller number of security professionals out there. They have a selection of the jobs they may want to do, and typically in a supply and demand situation, the price required to hire those individuals goes up. And so universities are challenged in trying to find the money to pay higher salaries. So something to keep in mind. In terms of policies and procedures, as you are probably aware by now, policies do not always keep up with the technology. We like to say that when Congress enacts laws, that it's usually 10 years behind the technology curve the day that law is enacted. Well, similar things can be said for the university environment. And the process to get a policy in place or to get one updated, especially at a university the size of Purdue, it takes a while. It has to go through a lot of committees, a lot of review, and everybody has to weigh in on whether that's a good idea or not. There's wording choices that are always examined and pondered over many times, and so it can take years for some of these updates to occur. Meanwhile, the environment's changed. New threats have come up, and the policy that goes into effect, 5 years after it was started down the road, may not be effective when it's actually implemented. So those are issues that we typically run across. Part of the problem with having a lot of policies is we may not have the follow-up implementation guidance that tells you how to implement a particular policy. These can be typically what we might call standards or guidelines, and these are more the nitty-gritty technical details of how to implement a policy and how to configure a system or whatever for use in the environment that meets that policy. And so typically that knowledge is left to just a few individuals in the university that have kind of an ad hoc process. There's nothing really documented about how they do their job. But it's very important that we figure out how that works, because if for some reason someday they find a new job or they get hit by a bus, we want to make sure that that knowledge stays with the university and doesn't walk out the door with them. And so those are always issues that we want to keep in mind whenever we deal with policies. And this is true of corporate environment as well. In terms of technology, universities seem to be a lot like corporations. We have a lot of new tech, and we have a lot of legacy tech. And even the newest corporations out there still run on mainframes and COBOL. And sometimes that is true for university environments as well. And so moving away from, a lot of universities are starting to move away from this idea that we'll build our own apps that we use internally, and instead they're going to a model where they purchase services or products from outside, and they have no hand in the development, only in the implementation of it. And so that's a challenge, because a lot of people who have the in-depth understanding of how systems work no longer work for the university. They work for somebody else, and you pay them a lot of money for support. So if you have a product and you have a problem, you don't try to debug it yourself. You pick up the phone, you call Platinum Support and say, hey, I'm having an issue, step me through how to fix that. There's a high cost for that in terms of paying for the support contract, but having a high number of people who have in-depth knowledge on staff is also a high cost, and so there's a trade-off there. Whether we want to have significant number of very smart people on staff that know one particular system in depth, or if we just have a problem occasionally, we need to call support, we can do that. So there's a balance there that has to be made. The other last comment there on architects. We have a fair number of architects that deal with information. They might deal with storage, they might deal with systems or networks. And typically they're in the process of evaluating solutions from vendors and not designing solutions. So I have a software background, and I like to think that a software architect is more about building software, designing software, how to figure out how to effectively use how to effectively develop an application that meets certain requirements under certain constraints. Nowadays, it's more about architects spending their time evaluating a vendor solution and picking the best one. So that's kind of changed. University networks, as you know, are fairly open. We do allow quite a bit of stuff. We don't really restrict what you do on the network. We do not really regulate what goes out of the network, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But mostly we want to make sure that your experience at the university allows you to explore, to learn. Some of that requires us to maybe not have as many security controls in place that kind of prevent that knowledge or learning or collaboration. So we have to balance that as well. In a corporate environment, every one I've worked in, there's a firewall at the border and they don't allow traffic out. If you want to browse the web, you do it through a proxy, and that proxy may have limits on what you can do, and we don't have anything like that here. Most universities don't. We do have a lot of servers and services, if you may have noticed. There's more than just one Purdue website you go to, right? You go to Blackboard, you go to the main Purdue site, you go to the HR site, you go to the graduate school site, you go to each department has their own website. We have a lot of servers and a lot of services out there. That is also prime targets for people who might want to explore and learn more about how our internal systems work. We don't have a centralized way of managing all the devices on our network. We do manage some of our central IT systems that we do have control over, but it comes to your individual desktop or laptop or mobile device. We don't have anything over that, and we don't want to. We don't really want to know what you do with your device, although we can see some of that on the network side. But we're not going to go down and say, hey, you have to install this particular piece of software so we can go in and keep you safe. That's not really our mission to do that, and we don't want to. That's not a business we want to be in. So universities are fairly old organizations, and typically in older organizations, things change over time. They evolve over time. And specifically when it comes to IT, the first computer that a university may have purchased or even built was usually done by a department. That might have been electrical engineering, it might have been computer science or math, applied math. Those departments typically, way back in the olden days, would say, hey, we need a computer to do this particular research or whatever. And then eventually, computers became a little more ubiquitous across the university. And they develop in the departments themselves, kind of on the bottom layers. There's not really a focus initially. There's really, central IT, that's a foreign concept to an older university because there was no such thing as IT. They were just computers, right? And so that has changed, and as the university goes forward in time, there's this need to reduce cost, to centralize control, and so central IT becomes a factor in doing that. But it's very hard to do once you've already done that. Part of bringing all these IT groups together is to obviously save money, because you have fewer administrators to control a significant number of machines. You can reduce the number of resources you have to the level you need for that purpose. And instead of having IT departments in every school or college or department, those could be centrally managed. But that's still very hard to do. There's a lot of politics involved in trying to pull that control away. And so part of the problem with that, going back and trying to say, hey, we need to centralize control again, is that we're not going to make too much progress with that. And it also limits our ability to protect information and systems. So I'll quickly talk about budgetary issues. It's usually feast or famine, right? Some years are good and we get a lot of funding that departments can use to purchase additional resources. Sometimes they don't. If they're on a research grant and they get money to buy equipment, sometimes they overbuy. When you file the grant, a year before you actually get to the point where you can purchase stuff with that money, you may have spec'd out something very significant, but then in that year, the price has dropped, and so you can buy more. So you don't want to waste your money, and so you buy more. And so some of those systems sit around and are unused. Whoops, I'm sorry. You don't need to know about Taekwondo. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Okay, back to that. So research grants are a way that, unfortunately, some departments may overbuy and have a lot of idle equipment sitting around and they don't maintain it, and that becomes a source of it for attackers to be very curious about what those systems have. Typically, on a research grant, you're also paying research assistants to manage those systems. And they may be very skilled in the field of study, but I don't know if they're very skilled at system management and maintaining system security. Also, when we're talking about central IT, they typically have bigger budgets, can buy lots of equipment. But over time, that changes. So they might be able to buy a lot of equipment at one point in time, but then the budget drops and then suddenly they've got to cut back. And usually the cutbacks occur in staff. And sometimes the more experienced administrators that know all about how to run a system and how to secure it walk out the door for a variety of reasons. And so that's always a concern as well. In terms of regulations and compliance, the university, even though it is a quasi-state government entity, still has to comply with a lot of standards and compliance, such as FERPA, which is Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, which protects your student data. And then GLBA, which is deals more with financial institutions, but Purdue is considered a financial institution for a variety of reasons. One, because of your student loans. We have information about you and the loan amounts, and that's considered part of GLBA. HIPAA is related to healthcare information. And so even if we have researchers on campus that collect information about patients undergoing medical treatment, that is data that's considered PHI, and we're required to make sure we protect that. And finally, PCI, which is the payment card industry standard, specifically for data security. And that is because we accept credit card payments. So if you go down to the union and you swipe your card, that system has to be PCI compliant. So we'll talk a little bit about the assets of the university, and one of the big ones is the research that we do and the intellectual property generated by that. And that can be very interesting to a lot of attackers potentially. And so some of that is published information that certainly you want to share that. It might be patented information. It might be stuff that's in the process of being patented. And there might also be multimedia stuff, copyrighted material. All of that is very interesting to a lot of people out there. We don't always protect that adequately. Some professors may have that information on their laptop, and they do a lot of traveling, and they lose laptops. Some people might have it on an open lab or on a system in an open lab, and that can walk off just as easily as well. And so while we have a lot of data on our network, we don't necessarily have great control over it yet. We do have more requirements slightly, depending on the type of research, where we have to protect that information a little better. And so I've got a couple projects where that is a requirement, and that's usually federal government research in specific research areas. Another asset, which may not seem obvious, is your user account. Everybody here has a Purdue career account, and that career account gets you access to a variety of university services. And so that becomes a way for attackers to take a great interest in getting access to that account. Some of the ways they do that is through malware on systems. And once they compromise the account, we see them do a lot of interesting things. I believe in the month of July, we had almost 500 accounts compromised here at the university. And so has anybody received a call from the customer service center asking you to reset your password? No one will admit to it. Okay, good. Good, you don't want that. That basically means that your account was discovered as being used by somebody other than you. And typically they might be using it to send out spam messages. Typically that's how we find it typically. But it could also be used to host phishing or malware sites. So if you have an account and somebody discovers that they can create a couple web pages on your account, they'll use it to create a phishing site. And then they'll spread spam messages and phishing messages elsewhere to other places, and then the people clicking on those links will bring them to our site. And that doesn't look good for Purdue, and we don't want to. We want to make sure we get a hold of that, and so we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we have a variety of ways of detecting when accounts are compromised, and we're improving that. But it is a difficult one, especially because we got, like I said, almost 500 accounts in 1 month. We also have significant IT resources, both in processor capability, storage, and our network bandwidth. So Purdue's connection to the commodity internet right now is 10 gigabits per second. And our connection to the research network is 100 gigabits per second. And so somebody who has access to that amount of bandwidth might want to use that bandwidth. And so sometimes they're using it to send out a ton of spam, for example, because we have such a fast connection to the world and we have a lot of resources and systems that can be compromised. There's a significant number of spam messages you can send with that amount of bandwidth available to you. So that's one thing they do. In terms of high performance computing, we got a lot of that. You may have heard of our research community clusters. And those servers are not those in particular, but when we have a lot of bandwidth or a lot of CPU available, some malware likes to use that to do interesting things. Crack passwords is one good example, but mining bitcoins is another one, and that's a fairly recent one, not too recent, maybe in the last year, now that bitcoins have kind of been a little more interesting in terms of their price. There's malware out there, and we do know of it being here on the campus, where it will actually use the CPU on the system of the box it compromises to mine bitcoins. You don't get those bitcoins, sadly. They go to somebody else. But they are stealing CPU for that. And then storage. In the past, when I was a student, a long time ago now, FTP servers were often compromised and copyrighted software was placed on that, and then they would send out a note on IRC or on the message boards and say, hey, I just put all my stuff on this really fast server with a really great really super fast bandwidth. Come and download it. And those were called WARES sites, W-A-R-E-Z. We don't see that as much these days because storage is so cheap, but still that is something that did happen a lot. In terms of threats, we've got malware, which we've talked a little bit about recently. Those are still, we have anti-malware protection for some of our internal systems, and we have a way to push out updates automatically to those and then get alerts on events such as malware attack on a particular machine on somebody's desk. We can see those. We don't see that for any students, and some departments use it, and others not yet, but we hope to get them on it as well. So we have some of that, but these systems can still be compromised by zero-day attacks, exploits due to poor software configuration or lack of updates. Those are always an issue. As I mentioned, we don't control student systems, so that's always a problem. We do encourage people to install anti-malware software. We make it freely available from the Secure Purdue website. If you have not installed that, I would encourage you to do that. That is paid for by the university and is available to you as a student. But even those systems can be compromised too. As we know, anti-malware software doesn't catch everything. So you should run 2 or 3 versions of anti-malware software, right? That'll work better. And finally, if you're in a department where they have reduced their IT staff or they're in the process of hiring additional IT staff, sometimes the people that have their end device are often asked to manage that device. And so I know quite a few professors. I don't know any of them being system administrators. And they're more interested in making the machine work, not necessarily work safely or securely. So that's always a challenge as well. That comes back also to misconfigured systems. We do see a lot of that. Some of this is related to having information about how to secure systems, but we want to make sure that that is available to users. Specifically, some departments that may not have the significant IT resources available to them might not make the right choices in terms of protecting their systems. So we might see students who may have systems that they've configured, downloaded Linux or something like that, and they've said, ooh, look at all these new services, and they'll just turn them on. Not always configuring those services. Maybe just experiment, and we encourage that, but there's some security issues there that always we should be aware of. But we hope to promote various security techniques to prevent those things, but that doesn't always happen. Also, if you're a research assistant and you're asked to do some software work, you might write some really great software with a lot of bugs in it. And that happens. And so, or you might write your particular application on top of a framework, but you never updated that framework. And so that framework has a number of vulnerabilities in it. And so part of maintaining secure systems is making sure the frameworks and software you're using are up to date, patched, and then restricted so that you're only limiting access to a particular number of networks or systems. So if you do find that you are writing software and you're not quite sure of its security, at least limit who has access to it. Don't allow the world to see it if only somebody at Purdue needs to. Okay? Similar issues, well, we've already talked most of that. Adventurous students. We love adventurous students. We do. I mean, the whole point in coming to the university is to learn and to do interesting things. We just ask you to be careful in how you do those things. And so, we're here to encourage, and we want you to learn. But if you feel the need that breaking into a system to prove your ability is a cool thing to do, let's not do that. We will find you something that we don't mind you breaking into if you really have an interest in doing that. See me later. But some of the things we used to do as students on our own computers were as part of our learning process, typically crash those machines. And, once you take that programming in C course and you learn about fork, first thing you want to do is run a fork bomb. And it's a lot of fun. Just do it on your own machine. Some people like to run those on multi-user servers and bring down the whole machine, and that's never good. So don't do that. I will find you a Linux VM if you'd like, and you can run it on that and crash it to your heart's content. You can go in and delete the whole file system while the machine is running. That's fun. Just watch where you're doing it, right? So, anyways, we've had issues with web crawlers. Students write web crawlers to crawl the Purdue network and slow down and saturate the network. Hey, web crawlers, we love them. Just throttle them a little bit. That's all we ask. And finally, trying to find exploits in systems. Part of the challenge we have in the information security field, and specifically at CERIAS, was we want to teach students how to use vulnerability assessment tools, but we have to find the right environment in which to do that. Running a vulnerability scanner against a production system on the university network would not be really a good idea. But we can find ways for you to learn how to use those tools, and I encourage that. Those are tools that we use all the time. But we have a very specific target in mind, and we make sure everybody knows we're doing it, and we have clearance for it first. Okay. But other than that, hey, if anybody's actually very interested in doing any of these types of things, please see me later. We'll find ways for that to happen. We have the CERIAS Student Association, which we've talked about multiple times, setting up a cluster of machines for that purpose, and we may just need to kick that project off a little quicker. So this is kind of a little short talk, but I'll have time for questions if you have any. But specifically, I wanted to wrap up and talk about the fact that the university has a lot of similar assets to the corporation. It's just how we protect them is a little different. We encourage openness and collaboration. We want you to be here to learn. We want you to learn how to use security assessment tools to build secure systems. We're all for that. We're great. That's great. We want to do that. But we just need to find the right environment in which you can do that and not affect other parts of the university. So, and finally, we're involving information security management, specifically at the university. We have a lot of new and interesting security tools that we're trying to use to help us protect the university's network and you as a student population as well. And so we've got a lot of interesting things going on there. So that's kind of short and sweet, but are there any questions specifically? Is anybody here interested in, 1 second. There we go, sorry. Anybody here looking to become information security professionals? Is this an interest of anybody? Security architects or security engineers? Security researchers? A couple hands? Okay, great. We have a great need for information security researchers and engineers, and I don't know if you've seen job postings lately, if that's of interest. So there's a lot of work out there in the field. So there's typically, when I work with a lot of other security engineers, they have a variety of skill sets. They're not focused on antivirus software or system security specifically for an operating system. They do a wide variety of stuff. And so having a wide set of skills in understanding how networking works, understanding how operating systems work, that's all very important. So I'd encourage you to kind of broaden your skills in that area if that's a path that you want to go down in your future career. We also have a great need for leaders. And so if you worked in the corporate world, and I made the joke about managers earlier, technically I'm a manager now. I have people that report to me. So you can make all those jokes and I would probably laugh with you. But it is a new challenge for me specifically, having to manage a group of individuals and figure out how to best apply their knowledge and skills. So having that understanding of leadership is also very important as well. So if you find the opportunity to take an organizational leadership class or anything like that, I would encourage that as well. That's also very helpful. If you want to rise to the ranks of of chief information security officer or chief security officer, that's definitely a skill you'll need to have. So it's very important. Yes?
Where do you think, like, I used a lot of remote access
Mm-hmm.
on secure systems, so we had a VPN connection.
Yep.
And then originally it was just a VPN, you sign in and you're in, and then it went to phone factor, where
Right.
when you sign in, it calls you and you have to press blah, blah, blah. Where do you think that fits into this? Is that something that more and more are going to, or?
We have at the university a set of two-factor authentication systems. Right now, if you're familiar with the boiler key, which I don't have on me at the moment, the boiler key is basically an RSA key token that generates a new random number every, seemingly 60 seconds. So the universities are using those. We are looking to replace the boiler key with something in the future. With what that will be yet, we're not quite sure. Phone factor is an interesting one in that it calls you back, and there's a lot of large social networking sites using that similar approach. Facebook, Google being the other two, and Apple has something similar to that. And so that is a mechanism that we are looking to use in the university environment. Mostly it applies to staff and faculty right now, but I believe this future solution we're looking at will be available to everybody that's on the network. Whether we're having the system call you is another question, or whether you have a device that generates a unique key that's valid for only a short period of time. So we're still evaluating that. So. But yes, having understanding of authentication is very important, as well as remote access tools and availability for those sorts of solutions. Very important. Yes?
So you talked early on about ad hoc processes.
Yes.
And knowledge transfer is a universal problem to any organization of any size. What have you found that works effectively? Like technologies like wikis and SharePoint, or policies, or?
Right. At CERIAS, we used a wiki to kind of communicate that transfer of knowledge, and we had to put quite a bit of information in there on how to manage our own systems, and then I would go to the other members of the team and say, okay, I wrote something up. Do you understand it? Does it make sense? If you were in an emergency situation and I was not here, would this be enough for you to understand? And so I kind of instill that perspective on them when they look at it, just to make sure that I wrote what's helpful for them. At ITAP, they have a SharePoint system, and we do use SharePoint for some things. However, the transition from an older SharePoint version to a newer SharePoint version did not go very well, and so we're trying to correct that. But we have a lot of information in SharePoint. It's just not as easy to get to right now. But I prefer using wikis, honestly.
So it sounds like you don't just write something, put it on the wiki, and let it linger. You actually do some kind of
Yep.
validation.
Yeah,
first.
I try to go to the intended audience and make sure they understand what I've written. And I encourage the team to do that as well. So if they've written something and they let me know, I look at it from a perspective of, okay, if you weren't here and I couldn't ask you a question, would this be enough? And so making sure that the information we have available would be helpful in an emergency situation. Because that's what we typically want to, that's not the only reason, but a lot of times it's either questions about things you don't do very often, or it's the person who has the in-depth knowledge is not available. And I want to make sure that we capture that in a way that is helpful. And so right now, I prefer wikis, but I'm kind of stuck with SharePoint. So. I don't want to be using it, trust me. Any other questions related to that? Organizational questions, industry related? Anybody interested in pursuing certification? Yeah? Have you looked at any particular kinds, like a CISSP or CISA? Right.
I held the CISSP at one point, and I would need to get it back.
Right. Yeah, CISSP is generally considered a fairly good professional certification. The trick with certifications, not everybody agrees that they have value. The value that I see in in a lot of the professional ones is that they require a work experience. They require continuing education. And so not only do you just take a test, you have to maintain that certification over time if you want to continue to hold it. And so there's value in that because you're required to make sure your skills are up to date. And so you need to prove that you've taken courses or that you've read a book or you've done certain activities that will advance your understanding and knowledge so you're on top of the technology. So that's where it does have some value. The challenge for grads out of college is getting that work experience in. And so if you have co-op jobs or internships, those can count. So make note of those as well. But if you have a college degree, it's only a 4-year work requirement. So it's a little, you shorten it by a year. So, but that's something to keep in mind. Like I said, a lot of job postings you'll see require it now. It could be, if you're doing an auditor type position, it might be a CISA. If it's more of a management level position, CISSP. If it's a management of a technical function, it might be a CISM, which is Information Systems Management. If you are looking to become a networking expert, you might be looking at the Cisco Certified Internet Networking Expert Security. They've got a whole classification now for just the security aspect of Cisco products. The only trick with those are that if you're going to be working with Cisco gear all the time, that's great until your company buys ProCurve. And it's not that you can't apply the same concepts that you learned for the Cisco certification to a new set of hardware. It's just that there's a mismatch there. And so that's something to keep in mind. If I have a CISSP and I'm using my Mac today and suddenly tomorrow I have to use Windows, well, that certification doesn't really change, right? My understanding of the technology based on my knowledge of the certification and the requirements of that are really the important part. That book of knowledge is the common understanding that the professional certification provides you is really the key point there. Any other questions? No? Certainly there's some. Anybody doing interesting research in information security? Or want to be doing interesting research in security? No? Okay. Well, you're supposed to ask me questions. I'm not supposed to ask you questions. So. All right. Well, thank you for your time then.